Welcome back to the Gradually Well podcast. My name is Mariah Chante. I am a health and wellness coach, but as well as your host here, and I'm glad you decided to listen in today. So, here on this show, we like to share wellness tips, and they're meant for people that want to live their lives intentionally and with purpose, but it's tailored to your specific situations and what you need. Because we all know that the cookie cutter diet and routine stuff is just not going to cut it. All of our situations may be similar, but they are nuanced. So, if you're a person that wants to live intentionally well and wants to live in a healthy lifestyle and figure out what wellness means to you, you're in the right place. So, we don't just focus on the diet and exercise, that is one aspect of it, but there are 7 other areas of your life that we like to consider when we're talking about improving your well being and your lifestyle. And we discuss each of those areas because all of them have a contribution to providing you some peace of mind, giving you that energy to thrive, and help you figure out what living well looks like for you. So, let's get into it. A few episodes ago, I decided to have a little bit of fun at the beginning of the episode and do a would you rather question. It went over really well, so I thought of another one for today. Okay, so the question is, would you rather have a make my day better pass? Like, say you're going about your day and it's a little rough, and you just say, I want to use my pass, make my day better, better than how it's going. Would you rather have that? Or would you rather have the ability to look at what your day was going to look like before it happened? So, like, you wake up in the morning and you get a snapshot of how your day is going to go before you go about the day. Which one would you prefer? Now, I was thinking about my answer to this. And at first I thought, like, yeah, I'd rather see how my day is going to go, because then maybe I could change my actions if I see something that's going to happen that I don't necessarily like or whatever. But I feel like that's a lot of stress trying to change my day. And if it's going to happen, it might happen anyway. So I just decided I think that's too much pressure, too much stress for me personally. So I think that I would go with the make my day better pass. That's less stress. It's just like, if I'm having a rough day, make it better. You just know it's going to get better. May not know how. I think that feels easier and easier to me. So I think that's what I would go with. I want to know your answers. So as always, share your response wherever you're listening. I look at the comments and the reviews all the time. So let me know, would you rather have the make my day easy pass or the ability to see what your day would look like? Okay, so that's just a fun little segment that I like to do. Maybe I'll come up with another one for next week. So today is actually a little bit special because 1 year ago, actually, October 2nd, 2022, is when I uploaded the first episode a whole year ago. So we are a year in, and that's very exciting. So I guess this is kind of like the 1 year episode anniversary, and I'm really happy to still be making episodes and hopefully providing valuable content for you all. And I'm glad you're still listening or joining us. So for today's episode, it is inspired by the first episode. And as you can tell by the title, I want to talk about living with chronic illness. And I was looking up statistics about this, and according to the CDC, 6 in every 10 Americans have a chronic illness. So that's over half of the population, including children. Over half of us have at least one chronic illness, which means that, the majority of us either have one, or if you don't have one, you probably know someone that has one or are close to somebody that has at least one. And there's a lot of people. I think the next statistic was that 4 and 2 of those are adults, and many people have more than just one illness. So to me, that says that Well, one, there we need to be better about prevention if there's a way to be able to prevent some of these diseases and illnesses. And then also, we need more support, more conversations about these things too, because while we are living our lives, there's a lot of nuance to living a healthy lifestyle. That's why a cookie cutter diet and exercise routine isn't going to work for everybody, because there is nuance there. And if over half the population of the US, at least, I'm not sure the statistics for the world, are struggling with a chronic illness, that matters, right? And it's a big impact. So I wanted to talk about this because in my first episode, I talked about chronic illness and my experience with it, because it's honestly what led me to this point of being interested in well being and health and wellness, and it being more than just diet and exercise, because it is so much more. So, just to kind of recap, in case you haven't heard that first episode, I shared my experience, my story of being diagnosed with general anxiety disorder. I was in high school. I was having lots of different symptoms. Um, there was what felt like random times of feeling constantly overwhelmed. There were points where I would physically be shaking or feeling sweaty and had chest pains. There were physical pains from this. We didn't know what was going on, and I hid it for a lot of the time, or for a while, because I just was confused. Like, I'm like, I didn't know what was going on, but it just seemed like to come out of nowhere, and then it would go away and then it come back, and it seemed to just happen anytime, no specific time. So that was also a really big challenge for me, and like a version of high functioning anxiety, because I was able to maintain a certain level of my day to day tasks. Like, I was still able to show up to, well, at the time it was school or work, and be able to perform well enough where maybe the average person couldn't be able to tell anything that was wrong, because I was still able to show up the way that wasn't concerning. So I had some high functioning anxiety there. But even when I got a diagnosis, which took several tests, several ruling out things, because, because I was having the physical pains, we had to rule out um, diseases that were wrong with my organs, or organ systems. Like I was saying, I'm having chest pains when I walk. And so when we got down to it, and it was anxiety disorder, I was like, well, one, I had never even heard anybody with that. And it just kind of seemed random. I hadn't even heard being diagnosed with anxiety was the first time I even heard the word anxiety. And this was back in 2010, 2011, I want to say. So mental health wasn't as big or as popular a conversation back then, especially in the circles that I was around. So it was a very, very new concept to me. And it was just kind of like, oh, something physical is not wrong with you. So it's all in your head, or you're not really sick, kind of things too. And so I think even though I was the one with the diagnosis and was feeling my feelings, there was a little bit of denial going on there as well, because it's just like, oh, nothing's really wrong with me. There are people that are like actually sick and stuff. So it took a while to even accept that what I was dealing with was a real and legitimate thing, even though I was still feeling all the symptoms, even though I got to a point where I was crying at night, crying myself to sleep, or crying in private a lot, and then just like, wiping the tears because I was too embarrassed to let anybody know that I was struggling internally. Just didn't feel right, and it was foreign. But I say all of that to say that this kind of sparked my interest in health and wellness, because with all of the symptoms, it wasn't just physical symptoms that were affecting my life. And I say that because anybody with a chronic illness, or has ever been uh, dealt with anything, a disease or illness similar or not similar, knows that symptoms do not care what you have going on in your life. You could be at school, they don't care. Symptoms could show up when you're at work, because they don't care. when you are on vacation, when you are having fun or being serious in a meeting, when you're trying to take care of your kids, symptoms don't care. And then when you add on top of you don't know what's going on, you don't know what your triggers are, especially when you don't know what your triggers are, it just adds fuel to the fire and it can affect every area of your life. Because if you're at work, if you're at home, if you're with friends or family, or just trying to study, that affects the other areas of your life, your relationships, your social life, your career, your finances, everything, your intellectual capabilities. So that's why I harp so much on dealing with wellness, and living well is not just about diet and exercise, because it's not, those aren't the only two things that make a difference, and those are not the only two things that are affected by it. And I share that because I know that from, yes, a professional perspective, but from a very personal perspective as well. And in my journey, my mom was actually a really big help to me in this. She actually helped me expand my perspective when it came to considering things outside of the physical symptoms. When we learned that it was anxiety, and I'm like, well, I feel physical pain, but like there's nothing physically wrong with me. That was like mind blowing as well, because it's like, okay, it's nothing really wrong, but I'm like, I'm feeling physical things. So then that's when we started with diet and exercise, because that's what we knew. We started where we knew. And then we were like, okay, well, maybe it's my environment. And I had to start paying attention to, when are these symptoms coming up? Because at first it felt random. And then it was like, well, whenever you're feeling them, notice where you are and describe the environment and what's going on there, and if there's any patterns with this. So just, my mom was a really big help in that. And then hindsight, as an adult, I came to realize that my mom was probably able to help me so much, and thinking outside of what naturally came to mind, or just my limited perspective, was because she, from a very personal perspective, understood how much disease and illness could affect your lifestyle. When I was in middle school, she was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and it's a condition that affects your brain, your whole nervous system. And I remember being a kid watching the changes that physically happened to her, but just also the different changes in our lifestyle as a family. And being a kid watching a parent affects you, of course, as well. But later on in my life, as I was diagnosed with a chronic disease, very different anxiety, very different from MS, I began to understand the length of which an illness can really affect you as well. So I share these experiences to show that whether you are the person that has been personally diagnosed with a condition, or you may not have been diagnosed, you are just experiencing the symptoms of an illness, or you are the supporting person of someone, of a loved one, maybe a partner, a spouse, a child, a parent, and they have been diagnosed or are going through with a chronic illness. You all have a very special place in my heart from personal experience, but again, also because this is a really big deal, especially even in the US. I'm sure globally, but I have the numbers for the US, so I'll speak on that, like how it's over half of the US population with people dealing with at least one chronic illness, which is a big deal. So I want to have a conversation about it and offer support and education about it, because we need it. And I would also like to extend help the way that my mom was able to do that with me. So for today's episode, I'm going to focus on offering 3 tips when it comes to living with chronic illness. And again, this is beneficial for both the people that are the ones that are dealing with a chronic illness and the supporting people. Before I dive into the tips here, I do just want to do a quick education moment just to clarify some of the terms that I'm using here. I know you've been hearing me say the words chronic and disease and illness a lot so far, and I'll continue to use them. So just to make sure we're on the same page, and in case you haven't heard or aren't too familiar or just need a refresher, chronic means it's ongoing or reoccurring. And when you're talking about health conditions, typically in the health world, that means that is something that's been going on for 1 year or longer. Typically, I'm not saying that's a hard and fast rule. So chronic means it's long term, basically. Now, illness and disease, a lot of people do use them interchangeably, but there is some nuance there. They both describe when something isn't acting normally. There is an abnormality going on there, right? So, but illness tends to be a much more broad term and is actually based on the person or the patient's experience and perspective. So that's an illness. And then a disease is kind of more concrete because it is based off of pathology or test from a medical professional perspective. So, in other words, disease has some science supporting or confirming the illness. I'm sure there's better ways to define that more technically, but that's just the basic difference between the two. So, a couple examples of a chronic disease. I mentioned that I had anxiety. Before I was diagnosed, I would have described that as a chronic illness. It can still be considered a chronic illness, but it's also a chronic disease once I got diagnosed with it and it was confirmed. Uh, my mom's MS is also a chronic disease. Another example, I have asthma, so that falls into that. And a couple other common chronic diseases are things like arthritis or diabetes and even lupus. So those are just some examples of diseases that have some medical pathology behind them, and those are also diagnoses. So those are examples of those. But if I were just describing the symptoms and my experience of it, I would say a chronic illness. So just some vocab there for you. And I'm speaking to both groups and conditions in this episode. So back to the three tips of with when it comes to living with a disease. First, I want to point out that it's going to be helpful if you are feeling overwhelmed at all with your disease or with supporting someone that is dealing with illness or disease. And this is helpful if you're feeling overwhelmed at all. It doesn't matter if you were recently diagnosed or have been diagnosed a while ago, but are just really suffering right now and just feel overwhelmed. So, no matter where you are in the journey with chronic illness, this could be beneficial in supporting you and bring you some peace of mind while you're navigating what living well looks like for you at this point in your life. And a good outcome could be that, again, defining and getting closer to identifying what a healthy lifestyle looks like for you and for your loved one, because that is available. Sometimes when we think that you have a disease or you have an illness, that you cannot have a healthy lifestyle, but there is a version of what is healthy and well for you even with a chronic illness or a chronic disease. And so I think it's important to explore what is available to you and what a healthy lifestyle can look for you in your new lifestyle or with these new conditions, because it's going to affect how you act and maybe even how you feel, and it can help you be better at maybe changing some behaviors that are more supportive to your wellness journey. Some other practical ways that defining and identifying what a healthy lifestyle can look like for you with this condition is it can help you manage your expectations of you and your loved one. I want to take a moment here to just acknowledge the unspoken challenges that come with illness and disease. First of all, there's so many valid challenges that I couldn't even list all of them because I haven't had everyone's experience. But I know that there's so many moments where we are facing things that we didn't expect to be a challenge. And it may seem silly that it's a challenge or for you, and you may try to negate it, or you just don't feel warned about it, or kind of blindsided by it. But I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the unspoken challenges. So, like, for instance, your newfound limitations. You may remember a time when going to the grocery store wasn't a big deal, but now that you have whatever illness, I could say anxiety, it is a big deal. It is a big task, a big thing to ask of you. And that is, in your mind, you might be saying, "Ugh, going to the grocery store shouldn't be such a big deal." Like, you almost want to feel silly about it, but it's not silly. And it can be a very real challenge facing these new uh, limitations that you didn't have before. Another challenge that I feel like isn't talked about as often when it comes with illness, especially if you've had an illness for a while, are the feelings associated with it. Yes, you have lots of feelings in the beginning, and there may be more support and understanding, but sometimes that can kind of fade and wane. But feeling frustrated or angry or alone, or constantly misunderstood, maybe even jealous sometimes of other people's situations, or upset at your own situation, that's unspoken sometimes, especially for those people that have had their chronic condition for a while. But that is a valid challenge to have to overcome or work with and experience as well. Another challenge is finding support. Like, maybe it is the having access to resources is a challenge for you because you don't have health insurance. That is very real and a common problem for people. And maybe it's not so literal in that sense where you don't have access to health insurance. Maybe it's a lack of support from friends and family because they're not supporting you the way that you hoped they would, and they don't understand how to support you. Or maybe you don't know how to communicate what you need. Maybe you don't know what you need, but you feel like you need support, and that is frustrating as well. So that's a little bit of the feelings and a lack of support. And I'm just listing all of these again because I want to take a moment to just validate these very real challenges and these experiences. And I just want to take a moment to say that you don't have to rationalize whether or not this should be a challenge for you. If it's a struggle, it's there. It's part of your experience, and you don't have to try to dismiss it either. So I know that's a big part of dealing with chronic conditions, having so many unspokens, but they are valid. Now, finally, on to the tips. So, tip number one when it comes to living with a chronic illness: education. I know that sounds super basic, but start with what you already know. Because when it comes to conditions and disease or illness, it's already overwhelming when you're the one experiencing it or watching somebody you love change because of what they're going through. And life doesn't typically slow down either. The bills still have to get paid. The kids still need to go to work. You still need to make or school, and dinner still needs to be cooked. So it can be very overwhelming, incredibly overwhelming. So sometimes education just feels like, okay, just tell me, you trust your doctor or you trust whoever, and say, just tell me what I need to do. And what does this mean? We want quick answers and stuff like that. And that's fine. That's a good way to start. But I also find that taking the time to keep your memory fresh of what can be affected can be so helpful. That's part of what opened my perspective, was doing some reading and researching with my mom about anxiety and educating myself. A good place to start is to start with what you know. And it doesn't matter if it's nothing. Like, when I was diagnosed with anxiety, I hadn't even heard the word before. So I found myself asking my doctor, looking up, researching what is anxiety, and then just kind of got a gist of what different resources said that it was, how it happens, things like that. As you research the things or get clarity on the things that you know, questions are going to come to mind. You can write down your questions and then start to research the answers to your questions. When it comes to research, I know that can be overwhelming as well. So, if you are comfortable, you can make a list of your questions and ask your doctor at your next appointment. I know that's not always an easy thing to do or comfortable to do for people, depending on your medical team. So, if you don't feel comfortable asking the questions, if you're not comfortable in advocating for yourself quite yet, maybe you could just start with point me to some resources and start there. I also find myself, I don't have a problem asking my doctor questions, but I sometimes forget. So I make a running list in my phone of questions that I want to ask. So sometimes it's just making a list of questions that you need answers to. And but again, you could ask for what are reliable resources that I can look to as well. And you can also do research on your own. I would just say to try to find valid resources. There's going to be, of course, blogs and so many opinions and things out there. So always take things with a grain of salt and see if people are even referencing their data. So word of caution there. But if that feels overwhelming, I'd say, start with what you know, write down your questions. You could ask your doctor or the questions directly, or ask to be pointed in the right direction for resources as well. Another way to educate yourself is to, instead of doing a bunch of reading and writing about it all, listen to audiobooks or podcasts about your specific condition, because that could be helpful as well to kind of listen in the background once a week or whatever, however you want to. Sometimes it's easier to listen to somebody than read about something. So that's a great way to be able to educate yourself about this illness as well. And I just want to emphasize that education is going to be valuable to you because it's going to help you understand more of what you're going through. It could help you prepare for things that may be to come, and it can play a part in offering that peace of mind and help you build that confidence that you need to advocate for yourself. So that's tip number one: educate yourself. Tip number two ties into one of the challenges that I listed earlier that comes with living with a chronic illness. So acknowledge the feelings that come with it. When you're diagnosed or even feeling the symptoms, lots of feelings come with that. And then, as the years go by, the feelings come and go, they go up and down. I find myself like, it's been years since I was diagnosed. And I'm like, oh, when I'm having an anxious time, I'm like, really? Sometimes it's easy to like shame yourself or be disappointed in yourself, but acknowledge those. It's so easy and normalized to just stuff your feelings down. But I like to say that feelings are our feedback. So take the time to acknowledge them, because it's going to help you further understand your triggers, and it can help you identify what your triggers are, which can get you closer to being able to create a plan that is going to help you prevent being triggered, or know what to do when you are triggered. And acknowledging feelings is also beneficial in establishing connection with yourself and knowing what is going on inside and dealing with those things, and not having displaced feelings directed at the people around us. But it'll also offer, it's a way to have better connection with people, the people that want to support you. And maybe if you want to be part of people that are going through similar circumstances, that's a way to connect, being in tune with your feelings, or at least aware of them. And even connecting with people that maybe not going through the similar things that you have, like they don't have the same condition, but can resonate with the same feelings. Earlier, I mentioned my mom was able to support me a lot, and it's probably because she understood to a degree how I was feeling with the diagnosis of something I had never heard before. MS and anxiety, two completely different things, but I believe with her being able to acknowledge her feelings, she was able to support me as I felt mine. So that could be very beneficial because I know a lot of people really struggle when it comes to finding support and building support. And I do believe that feelings could be one way to finding access to the kind of support that you need. So, and I'm not saying here to that you have to share your feelings with the world or shout them from the rooftops. Acknowledging your feelings can be a very intimate, personal experience. You can start with just thinking them through, taking a moment to feel them. Because sometimes we don't even try to pause. A lot of times, if we feel an uncomfortable feeling, we just want it to go away and distract ourselves. So even just sitting with the feeling and thinking about what happened and what how you got there is that's considered acknowledging. Another way to acknowledge is to journal that, and when I say journal, it can be written like writing in a book or a piece of paper, or you could do audio journaling. So that is when you would maybe record yourself and your what you're feeling and your thoughts around that. Most of us have a smartphone and they come with these recording apps already on them, so you could just press record and dish out your feelings there if writing is not your jam. So that's another way to do it too. Talk therapy is also a method of confronting your feelings with a professional. That could be a good option for you possibly. And then or talking with somebody that'll listen. Sometimes you just need a good listener. And if you have somebody in your life like that, use that. Absolutely. So, acknowledging your feelings, though, can prove to have so much benefit again for just understanding yourself, understanding your triggers, helping you create a plan when you are triggered, and even establishing connection. Third tip, tip number three is acknowledge your current realities. So, this one can be a little bit tricky because there's a ton of sensitivity around acknowledging what you can and cannot do because of an illness. I'll give an example with this. As a kid, and even into my adult years, I loved to run. Grew up running, really enjoyed it. But I also had asthma. So I had to learn what my triggers were and get really good at identifying when would be a good day to run or not. And I had to learn how to identify that for myself because when I was a kid, I would have adults have to tell me yes or no because the kids aren't as good as enforcing the boundaries. But as I got more independence when I grew older, I had to learn how to establish those boundaries for myself, which means that I have to be real with myself and acknowledge what is available to me in that time. And it was so frustrating when I would want to go and run, but I was having a little bit of chest tightness or my triggers were a little extra sensitive that day. It was hard for me to accept that it probably wasn't a good day to run because I'm like, I'm in shape physically, like, well, asthma is a physical condition, but like nothing was wrong with my legs, right? So I'm like, I'm physically able to run. Like nothing is preventing me in that way. But it might not have been a good idea if I was actively experiencing tightness. So there could be denial, a little bit of denial there. Even after years of having asthma, I still dealt with that and had to kind of learn how to be honest with myself and recognize my realities and not let other people's experiences or expectations dictate what was available to me. It's easy for somebody to look at me, especially because I was a runner, for them to say, you ran yesterday, like, so now all of a sudden you can't run today, but you're not sick. Like, not everybody's going to get your limitations. And I had to learn to not take that on. I don't have to explain it all to everybody. That's not my responsibility. And it's not yours. It's not yours either. So I had to learn to not shame myself and not take other people's expectations on. Another thing, because asthma is a common chronic condition. So it was also common for me to hear people say, oh, well, so and so had asthma, or I used to have asthma and I was able to do this, or my brother was able to do this, that, the third. So you may run into other people that have the same diagnosis as you, but your circumstances different. Your symptoms may be different. Your experiences, your boundaries may all be different. And so learning how to acknowledge your current realities is going to be so pivotal and so helpful for you as an individual, because that's going to help you be clear on what works for you and what is available to you in that moment. And I think this is an important lesson because not only does it help you be better at using discretion, but it helps you hold yourself accountable in your progress. For a long time, when I felt there were days I couldn't run, I thought that meant, well, that means I can't work out. Because running was the way that I worked out, I didn't really do many other exercises or incorporated movement into my life. I thought that meant I can't work out today. And that wasn't keeping myself accountable to moving my body regularly. So I had to start to be a little bit more open and try other things. So now I do like to walk. I do like to do home Pilates or other things that are available to me, and that has kind of extended my repertoire of exercises that I like to do. I used to be able to go running and then sit in a sauna after that. Now I'm like, no way. It's just not a good thing for me to try to do. And you don't have to try to convince yourself that that is a replacement. It would be crazy for me to try to tell myself walking is a great replacement for running. It wasn't. It doesn't. If you were a runner, if you ever loved a sport so much, and you have to do something else, you may enjoy something else, but it is not the same as the sport that you love to do or the activity that you love to do. Walking is great and I enjoy it and I do it often. Pilates is great and I do it often and I really enjoy it. But neither one of those are running, and you don't have to convince yourself that it is the equivalent to something that you love. But and that's an important point because that is part of well-being too. Typically I don't like to say the good and the bad because that's too like a restrictive, but well-being is about being able to acknowledge the good and bad across situations. So this is a great example of that. With my asthma, what running isn't always available or accessible to me. That's maybe the bad in this situation. But movement is still available and accessible to me. So I was able to do other things, walking or Pilates. And this isn't a advice to just look on the bright side point of view because that's really dismissive of the disappointment and what we are going through on the negative side. This is a look at both sides or all sides of the situation. That is a more balanced, neutral, healthier perspective to be in. So learning how to get there by acknowledging my realities has really helped me, and I appreciate when I am able to run now too. So that is the third tip that I want to offer. So wrapping up here, my challenge for you today is to choose one of those tips and try to focus on one of them for the upcoming week. Are you a person that needs to work on educating yourself about this illness because you're just feeling overwhelmed by it all? It's a lot. It's a lot for you, it's a lot for the people supporting you, and maybe it's time for a refresher. So maybe you need to spend some time educating yourself, or you're a person that needs to spend some time acknowledging your feelings surrounding this disease or this illness. Feel free to focus on that too. Or tip number 3, maybe you need to make some time to acknowledge your current realities. Not saying to harp on the negative side and not saying to diminish the negative side and just be at least you can do this, or just focus on the positive or alternative. Spend some time acknowledging what is accessible to you as well. So what is the whole reality? That takes practice at getting good at too. So I say to choose one because none of these are necessarily easy and they can take time to get really good at doing, and you'll need refreshers as you go along. So that is my challenge, to choose one and focus on that for the upcoming week. Don't add too much pressure to it. It's just meant to help support you in your journey. but I do encourage you to lean into one of these. Before we wrap up here, I would like to dedicate this episode to two special people in my life. First person is my mom, the one who lives with MS and is a constant inspiration to me when it comes to living life well with a chronic disease. And the second person I'd like to dedicate this episode to is my late aunt Tanya, who was a advocate for MS and offered support for the National MS Multiple Sclerosis Society. She did Bike MS and fundraised for that, and she was an advocate on the daily basis as a physician assistant, working with people with chronic disease. So thank you so much to my mom and to Tanya for all that you do. And for the impact that you have on this world. That is going to be everything. Subscribe to the show wherever you are listening so that you never miss an episode. I hope this was helpful. Until next episode. Bye.